What's going to happen right now is a panel. Sally is going to come up and have a armchair conversation with the general about the provocative topic of can we build an ecological civilization. So Sally Ranney and General Clark.
Wes has been introduced, and so has Catherine, but a couple things you don't know about Catherine. She was Under Secretary of State in the Obama administration and John Kerry for environment, economics, global growth, energy. Oceans, and energy. Not a large agenda. What she's doing right now, she formed a group called Listening to America. And she is doing what Maggie Fox was talking about. She's held many, many sessions. How many? Like
over 70.
Over 70 sessions around the country, just listening to figure out what Wes was saying, change at a deep personal level, a behavioral science. We have to understand behavioral science and behavioral economics, because that's where we are. So this conversation is pulling together, one of the themes that has come out of this is that we have to work as a global community. We have to come together and really understand that we are one humanity. And so this conversation is about globalization. And Xi Jinping recently came out with a very long, detailed statement about China wanting to pursue an eco-civilization, an ecological civilization, and he was very detailed in that. The interesting thing is that Chinese philosophy is based in the fact that humanity and nature have to get along. European philosophy, which now dominates a lot of the world, is humans are separate from nature. So we've got, and has China acted particularly in that way in the past? Maybe in some ways, maybe not. But it was a very strong statement. One of the things that came out of a session that I was in at another conference a while ago is that maybe renewable energy is the piece, the thread, that pulls people together. And maybe it's not. Maybe it's women around the world responding the way Maggie was talking about. And I just want to add one other thing about passion. There was a woman by the name of Marty Murray, and I know that Maggie knew her. She's now deceased. She was the first, and she was a good friend of mine. She was one of the first white women to go across Alaska with her husband, who was a biologist and who was doing work on wolves, on a dog sled. And she had her babies with her. She testified in front of the Senate. I was there, as I was testifying as well, on the Alaska Lands Bill. And she was so passionate and so authentic. And her feminine, her divine feminine, and her divine and her feminine energy came out so strong. And the committee chair said, "You're too emotional." Never, and she said, "I will never apologize for my passion for the earth." So I just wanted to share that story with you because I think that what we've heard this morning and what we heard yesterday, that passion ties us all together. So, sorry to take so long on that, but
it's important.
But I wanted to get into this conversation by going to Kathy, and globalization. You dealt with that, and globalization historically has been people when people came out of Africa and started moving into other areas. Immigration is globalization, climate refugees is globalization, and trade is globalization. There's pluses and minuses. And how does that relate to environmental integrity overall when you have this force of trade, economics, consumerism pushing what we see as globalization now. So,
Thanks. Well, interestingly, in the listening sessions that I've been doing in Listening for America, and they've been on globalization and the effect of trade and globalization on people, almost everybody, Republican and Democrat, raises the question of environment. And people understand that globalization is here and that the supply chains are interlinked, but they're also very concerned about what's happening, and are we opening our markets at the expense of environment elsewhere, and how can we deal with that? And trade agreements actually do try to deal with that in their capacity. They have a more narrow capacity to do that. But that actually surprised me. I thought that, of course, everyone's concerned about jobs, and that's not surprising. And there's been a lot of narrative about trade taking people's jobs away, some of which is accurate and some of which isn't. But that environment is so front and center in people's mind, I think is very, very significant, and it ties into everything that's already been discussed so far this morning.
is that a nebulous environment, or is can they articulate it more specifically about specific damage that they see, or local communities being impacted in a particular way?
Yeah, so it's very nebulous, and I think that's where, you know, we've talked about the need to also have facts, and I think it's how do you combine what do people care about themselves directly and what affects them directly, as well as the facts. Because the other thing that people have said, and why it's nebulous, is this is so complicated, I don't really understand it, and I'm not really sure where to get accurate, unbiased information about it. And everyone says that. I think, you know, we really have a communication issue, and we also have a communication opportunity here.
Yeah. Wes, in what you were expressing when you were speaking, there's globalization in trade, but we have now this populist movement that is spreading across the world, and everybody's contracting into their, not everybody, but a lot of countries, us being the first, contracting into national sovereignty comes first. So in an eco-civilization world that is described by Xi Jinping, that really doesn't work. And so I'm just wondering, is there a segue from where we seem to be going now into a global, I don't want to say the word consciousness, but a global awareness that if humanity and other living things are going to survive, we really have to work. The invitation to humanity is to work as one.
Well, I just want to make clear on this. You asked me, is democracy the solution?
Yeah.
Okay, now I want to be clear. Xi Jinping may be a very fine fellow, but he is not a Democrat.
Right.
And China does not run on the basis of democracy. It's run on the basis of power and a centralized system. And where we are in the world is we're contending in these forces. It's not clear that democracy is the way this is going to be resolved. Because if we can't articulate the needs, if people can't project into the future on something and then take actions in the present to forestall a future threat through a democratic process, through public education, through a political system that responds to money, then yes, it will be China's vision of an eco-civilization. Now, Xi Jinping he may be reflecting an Asian tradition, but look, he's under tremendous pressures himself because China's wrecked its own environment through its hasty development and reliance on coal. That's why they need our natural gas. But Xi Jinping also has a vision, and he wants China to return to its rightful place as the center of human civilization. And that's going to be a very difficult problem for Americans who believe that American values are the center of civilization. So we have to get through this without a war. So I think, you can't do it with no growth. The revolution of rising expectations is the way we used to talk about this 40 or 50 years ago, but nothing's really changed in that respect. Africa will produce 300 to 400 million people in the next decade and a half. Where are they going to go? They cannot go to Europe. We would welcome them to the United States, but they can't all come here. They have to have development. They want to live like we do. We're not, who are we to say they can't live that way? So we have the capital, we have the technology, we should have the leadership, and we should be working with these people. That's really what globalization is about, is helping men and women and their families have better lives and be able to appreciate, to move beyond the daily quest for 1,500 calories and a roof over your head into a spiritual dimension where life has meaning and growth and creativity. That's what we're all part of. But we can't get there without a strategy that conveys to the American people how we have to pull together on this. It's a tough problem.
Can I just add
A
to
narrative.
that? Yeah.
A narrative.
That I think part of the issue here is the vision that Wes just laid out has been projected as somehow there's a zero-sum game, that if we want to benefit, other people, if they benefit, it's always at our expense, and that is absolutely not the case, and facts will show that that's not the case. And China absolutely has a very different system than ours, and I certainly don't want to live under that system. There are lots of areas where we can cooperate, and what I found as undersecretary is that environment was one of those areas. And the pressure on China, interestingly, is partly a democratic pressure with a small d, because the population and Xi Jinping understands that he has to address these issues if the Communist Party wants to stay in power. And we saw that actually in the Soviet Union when the Environmental Protection Agency there was created because of societal pressure, even in the Soviet Union. So it isn't that we're all powerless, and it is not that our good is somehow, or others' good, I should say, is at the expense of our good. And we really have to, I think, move the rhetoric away from that. And that's where it is right now, is that everything is framed in winners and losers.
So this is back to the idea of fear. And our problem in this community is that we deal with hope and fairness and justice and truth. And on the other side, where important economic interests are arrayed, they deal in fear. And that fear is not just white men, that fear affects everybody. And you can feel it. It comes in with the attention to CNN when an airplane goes down or whatever. It's always there as a drumbeat behind you. What we are lacking is the spiritual hope and faith to move us beyond the fear. And I don't know which leader is going to be able to say this. We're not going to have another big war. And you're not going to lose your Social Security. And we're not going to be wiped out by a plague, and an asteroid isn't going to hit us. So, and Jurassic Park is not going to suddenly produce, pterodactyls to carry us away. So, but if you look at the narrative in this society, and all you see is dystopia and fear. You see Mad Max. You see science fiction that says things are going to be bad in the future. They aren't going to be bad. They're going to be good because we're good and we're going to make it good. But we have to get this out to people in a constructive way. It's the evolution of human society. Society's faced with challenges. We were given the gift of splitting the atom. The challenge was, could we receive that gift without destroying mankind? The answer was, we did. We somehow made it through. Now we've been given another gift. We have incredible economic development. Can we really raise people's living standards so everybody have a decent life without destroying the planet? Can we do that? That's the challenge and response for the human species. Why won't we succeed? We've succeeded in everything else. Where is the spirit of hope that's powerful enough to overcome the fear? So we have to have a needs statement, but we have to follow it with the uplifting hope, the spirituality, the positiveness, the reliance on each other. It's all there. We have to put it together. It hasn't been put together. Since 9/11, this society has labored under extraordinary and extreme fear, and there's no reason for it. We can fix it.
Well, I think we're in a very interesting place in history because we have to look at our assumptions. We have assumed as a collective, we've operated under fear, scarcity, competition, and what has that produced? Wars, terrorism, hoarding, you name it. So if the assumption is fear, and you look at that and you have to unravel that assumption, what would replace it? Hope is a piece of love. It's love. It has to be replaced with love. And that's not, and so when you talk about spiritual, okay, that's the bridge. We're in this transition between fear and love and hope and abundance and living in those assumptions. If we've lived in these other assumptions and we have manifested those assumptions. We have manifested that in our world. So we're in this process of going over to these other assumptions. If we live in those assumptions, we will manifest that world. That's how it works. So we're at a moment in time where there's been a spiritual bankruptcy.
Yep.
But we're moving into this other place. And that takes time. It's an evolution of awareness and consciousness, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
You know, so when you're listening to people, do you see that kind of happening?
So I would add one word to your list, and that is respect. And that is, I started listening to people because I was dispatched to go talk about a trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it was very clear that people didn't understand what was in it, and they didn't really think trade was necessarily helping them. And so I wanted to understand and connect people to policy because we are so disconnected in this particular area. And everyone of all political stripes, the fact that I and others are listening to them shows them great respect, and they all talk about that back to me. And I may not agree with them on everything, but I do respect them as people. And I think, you know, we sort of are in this really name-calling kind of situation that we're in right now, but that isn't what I find when I actually go talk to people. That's what the news media is putting out there. But there are people in communities coming together, doing good things for the environment, doing good things for each other. And yet they have this narrative of the big picture here, and I think James Fallows just talked about this. And yet what they're experiencing in their own life is not that. And it's how do we connect what they're actually experiencing and how they're actually living to this bigger narrative where there's just a gaping, there's no bridge to that right now.
I would add dignity to that.
Yes.
Too, which I think is the bottom line. That's the bedrock.
Yes.
I think is dignity. So you've been the Supreme Commander of NATO, and you have dealt with heads of state, with generals, with globalization in a much different context than the trade or the internet now globalizing us, media globalizing us. And how do you how do you think that we need to move forward, or how can we move forward when we've got oil companies and Fox News and a variety of, dark money and the dark web and all of that? How do we balance these forces, and then how do we move over to this other place from your point of view and your experience?
Well, I think we're not to the point where we don't have to fight for what we believe in. We might get to that point, Sally, on the other side of that bridge you're talking about, and we can see it over there and we can feel it as individuals, but we're not there yet. So the two political parties in America are totally asymmetric. There is no comparison between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The Republican Party is a very centrally directed party that has some unity issues right now, but it's about money, it's about power, it's about fear, it's about a lot of really smart, they came from behind. It's like Newt Gingrich told me in 1990. He came out to visit me when I was at the National Training Center, and he said, I'm from Fort Benning. I grew up around Fort Benning, and my stepfather was in the military, and I teach military history. And he said, I'm a congressman now. And he said, we got to learn, we politicians got to learn from you people in the military, because politics is a lot like war. And of course, I'm just a one-star, and he's an exalted congressman, and he's written books, and I haven't done any of that. And so I didn't realize how wrong he was. What I should have said to Newt Gingrich was, politics is exactly the opposite of war. In politics, you're not trying to destroy your opponent. You're trying to bring people together for a common purpose. And yet, it didn't happen. So he built a model of politics as war and sold it to the American people, or at least sold it to a large part of the American people.
The Contract for America.
It started with Contract for America. It was a stoppage of government. It was telling the Republican Party that if you don't fight against the Democrats, if you go along with them, you'll never be a majority party. Well, so now they're a majority party. You see, they really have a hard time governing, because they believe in these abstract principles that actually mostly don't work. It's not pragmatic. So, but we have to get through this. This is a world we live in. So here's what I would say. You'll know when the Democratic Party can master this challenge when you see the Democratic Party toughening itself up against collaborators. Now, I hate to say this, Sally, this sounds real mean, okay? But if you look at resistance movements in history, what happens is that people band together, and then they go after the outliers, and they form a strong core of resistance. And this is antithetical to what we stand for as a Democratic Party. Put 5 Democrats together, there's 15 great ideas, and we believe in every one of them. And yet, to go against the Republicans, we've got to create unity. We've got to create strength. We've got to reach people. And so when I look at what happened on North Korea, and I look at the commentaries on North Korea, I see a lot of Democrats, like Bernie Sanders, saying, well, this is a really good thing. No, it's not a good thing. You don't understand. Bernie, here's what happened with North Korea. We had a long-term problem. We still had deterrence. Kim Jong-un was not going to launch a single nuclear weapon against the United States. We have a president who created a crisis and then is going to solve it with a solution that was available to every president since Eisenhower, which is basically give up on Korea and leave. And that's the way this is going. It's unfolding in slow motion. He wants credit for it, but we aren't smart enough collectively as a party to come out strongly against it. You see the voices, and there's a cacophony of voices on the Democratic side. Some saying, well, at least we're not going to have a war. You were never going to have a war.
Right.
Never going to have a war. That was theater. There was no military option, never was. And so, we didn't have enough, we don't have enough unity in this party to be able to oppose and create the word this morning is narrative, against what's going on in Washington. And if we don't have that narrative, we're likely to end up without the victory in November that everybody's counting on in this room.
So what are you finding when you're in these listening sessions talking about, the world and how people are seeing themselves in the global setting? What are you hearing?
It's interesting. What I'm hearing is that people want the best, not just for themselves, but for others, which, again, that has been very interesting. And I spent a lot of time in the middle of the country. And people say, other countries, they deserve to make a living. I understand that. And I think that we have not done a good job of connecting their hearts to the facts. And so there's sound bites that kind of grab people and they think that that's what there is. But the other pieces of people, I believe that people do understand their best interest and that they are smart. They just don't have all the tools that they need, and I think that's partly on us to do that. And they are all asking for that. Every single person, no matter what news they listen to, says, I'm not convinced I'm getting unbiased information, and I really do want to know. And that also surprised me. And so I think this is a huge challenge that we have, and it's a challenge that we have to lead. But we have to lead by being true to our values at the same time, because the ends do not justify the means, and we cannot forget that. Every time we forget that, disaster happens.
So we're running out of time, but a quick question. Do you find that the majority of the people you're listening to are resonating with America First, or resonating with the global community, getting back to globalization?
I wouldn't say it's an either or. I think they have understood they have to take care of themselves and their family, but they don't necessarily say that me taking care of myself and my family means that everybody else has to, do worse. And so I think there is an understanding that we are in a global world. And of course we have to look out for ourselves, but looking out for ourselves and looking out for other people also looks out for ourselves. And that is the primary theme that I have heard from talking to people.
So I think we've got 33 seconds, and I just want to close by thanking both of these individuals who have been thinking and experiencing what we've been talking about all morning in their careers and their life work. And it sounds like, this bridge, we're all concerned about time because we're running out of time as far as the climate goes. Yeah. And we need to, everybody talks about flipping the paradigm. Well, what are the 1, 2, 3 steps of really flipping a paradigm? And one that just comes to mind is, wouldn't it be great if the next president created a peace room in the Pentagon instead of the war room? Strategies like that just flip everybody's thinking. So we have to go that far, that fast, I think, to be able to meet the deadline that we actually set for ourselves by behaving the way we've been behaving. So thank you very much, Wes and Catherine.
Good job, Sally. Good job.